Chelsea Newcastle, first of a two-game series. But who will draw blood first? Who will win? Who will qualify to the next round of the League Cup? Who would get points on the board as well in the Premier League? Find out here on Toon Tactics TV. All right. Good evening, folks, and I hope you are well wherever you are, coming back from work or about to go to work, and you're just listening to Toon Tactics TV today. I am glad that you are, and hopefully, with our special guest on tonight, you'll enjoy our conversations about the oncoming game this Sunday, Newcastle versus Chelsea, and I am super excited to have Dan on today. And I'm not just saying it because he's literally there in the waiting room. I'm saying it there because he's absolutely fantastic in terms of one of the few people that I get to watch. I remember watching like a 2-hour show he did like maybe 2-3 weeks ago, where he gave kind of a breakdown of Chelsea, talking about their squad. He's super analytical, which I like, and holistic, but also very kind of realistic, and he doesn't give in to the peer pressure that we sometimes get, all of us content creators kind of get when we're kind of talking, especially to rivals and stuff like that. So I'm super excited to have him on today, and let me get him on. Dan, how you doing, sir?
Yeah, very good, mate. That's probably the best introduction I've ever had, so I appreciate it.
It is well deserved. It is well earned, sir. How so? And like I said, super excited to have you on. How's your day going, by the way?
Yeah, good, mate. Been chatting Chelsea's game tomorrow. Obviously, we've got Panathinaikos in the Conference League, so we've got a little game to get out of the way first before we play you. But I'm very well. I hope you're doing well as well.
Yes, sir. Very well. I remember actually before I came onto the show, because I saw Chelsea, you are playing tomorrow, like you said. And we'll go right into, I mean, like, in terms of just warming the context in terms of our game this Sunday. Chelsea, obviously Newcastle got the whole week off. Chelsea have a game literally tomorrow, then you've got a few days rest. Now, which side of our argument are you on in terms of, is it better to have a week off, or is it better to have a game in between? How do you feel about it?
I am firmly on the Antonio Conte side of favouring a free week and playing my best team fresh, tactically prepared at the weekend. However,
Right.
Chelsea are in a pretty blessed position at the moment that Maresca seems to be able to rotate almost 11 players every game we have. So, yeah, we're obviously in a really good position in that sense. But look, Newcastle, obviously, you think that they'd be in a better position for it having the rest, and it's not quite been that so far this season in terms of results. But I actually think you've been playing some good football. So I think the midweek break definitely helps.
Well, I'm glad someone thinks that Newcastle are playing good football. If you listen to some of our fans on X, they think it's been atrocious. But I'm firmly on the side of we are improving. It's not quite Real Madrid just yet, but we are definitely improving. And so with Chelsea, I wanted to kind of, when I watch, I mean, I've watched you guys in Europe against Serviette, for instance, like that, and it does feel, I feel like there's a huge advantage for you guys in terms of being able to handle two competitions going forward. And I'm sort of skipping ahead, but there's a reason why I'm asking this. Do you think Maresca knows what his best side is?
I think to an extent he now has an idea. I think there's a number of positions that are nailed on. I think there's a couple of players he really likes, but he's not sure how best to fit them in. I think he's got a slight problem with some injuries. I think Lavia would be guaranteed to be starting every week, as with Reece James, but they've obviously only just returned as with injuries. But I think we're starting to see now a pretty set team week in, week out, with a slight adjustment here and there, tactically or form-wise.
And speaking of form, both of our teams lost our games the week that just came. But kind of me um, listening to some of feedback from fans and whatnot, especially if I'm listening to Chelsea fans and well, I guess from Newcastle fans as well. The performances have been decent. I mean, I laugh because I did send a comment to you whilst you were on your show, and I was like, Chelsea gave a good account of themselves, and you're like, no, they didn't. I'm like, sheesh, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that
Uh,
again.
Well, I don't mind, mate. No, do you know what? I think in the emotional moment, I felt very frustrated because I just feel like we could have got more out of that game. And looking back on it, I think there were moments where we did really give ourselves a good account of ourselves and show people what we are potentially capable of doing. I felt there were moments where we definitely could have done better, but that's always going to be the case when you lose
Yeah.
2-1 in a game. And there are moments that really shouldn't have ever crept up in my eyes, and they did. And I was quite frustrated that we never sort of identified that. So, yeah, for me, on the whole, an okay performance with definitely positives to take and a drastic change in where we were last year. So I can find the positives and I can see the negatives where we need to be constructive and not get our backs up and just work on them to be better.
What were you most frustrated about? Like, what was it that, well, not frustrated, but what were you kind of looking at,
So
thinking we could have
in
done
the
better?
build up to the game, I expected that the space between where Gusto would invert if he was to play, or not Cucurella, sorry, whoever would sort of occupy that role, where they travel into midfield into that advanced sort of 8-10 position on the left hand side of the pitch. I always felt that if Liverpool looked to play out on their right hand side, Gusto would have a hard time recovering to Salah, who would eventually cause issues. And I think all game long that was a bit of a problem. And eventually the penalty chances and shouts came from that side. The eventual penalty, I think, came from play down the right hand side. The eventual goal came from a pass from Salah. And I just feel like that sort of space where, if you see where Gusto is as the 27 there on the screen, it was always going to be a little bit more difficult for him to recover to where Salah was going to have an abundance of space. And the right hand side was
Right.
definitely an area for Liverpool that they focused on. If you notice, very early on in the game, Tosin actually had that confrontation on the right-hand side of the halfway line. I always felt that space would be dangerous. I also predicted that the danger zone that Arne Slot likes to refer to, which is on the D of the edge of the box, would become pivotal in terms of how well Chelsea could defend any runs or actions that happened in and around there. And Curtis Jones obviously ended up making a couple of third-man runs and eventually scored from that position.
So is it more? Was it kind of getting caught in transitions that was the main kind of concern for Chelsea?
Yeah, I think so. I think if we set up in a way that meant that we'd be exposed on that side where Salah is obviously most prominent, we would be at risk of conceding chances, and eventually that did happen. However, we limited Liverpool to a number of chances because I think it's the fewest they've had at Anfield since 2021.
Yeah. The thing I was going to ask is, I was surprised to see Gusto at left back at the start of the game. Is that should I be surprised by that? Is it you don't have Correa? Is Correa back, by the way?
Well, he was suspended for that one, so I
Okay.
think his hand was kind of forced. I actually felt like we might play Vega at left back and Gusto right back, but I wasn't aware that Reece James was ready to start. And I'm not sure whether I would have started Reece James or not. I don't want to come across too negative because I absolutely see what Reece James adds to this Chelsea side.
Yeah.
However, when you're limited to him having to come off around the 50th, 60th minute, you sort of force your hand, don't you, into a defensive substitution, whatever the situation of the game is. I then think if Lavia is also playing and limited to that amount of time, that also forces your hand into a defensive midfielder substitution, no matter what the result currently is at that moment in time as well. So to start two players was a bit of a shock to me, as I expected Gusto would probably start right back. He didn't, and he started left back. And did he have a great game? Probably not, to be honest with you. I think it was one of the players that was a little bit wasteful, especially in advanced areas.
Right. Going into this game, I don't know if you agree with this particular, was to say we're both for Liverpool and Chelsea, but we're speaking about Chelsea is we're going to learn more about who Chelsea are. Like in terms of everything else, like you've been having a great season, good season so far in terms of results, some good performances. Now you're kind of coming up against your biggest challenge at this moment in time, anyway, under Maresca, which is Liverpool. First of all, do you think that it's true that it should have been treated that way? We're going to learn who Chelsea are, and if it is, what did you kind of learn about Chelsea from this game? What stage
So
they're at the moment?
yeah, I think it probably was, because I feel like it's been so early to judge what Maresca's going to be about as a coach. He's only had sort of 9 games, I think probably 10 games as a Chelsea manager now.
Yeah,
Um, Forgive me if I'm wrong. It's probably not many more than that, though, if you
yeah,
include
yeah, yeah, yeah,
season. So it's very early to sort of judge. And in terms of who we've played, I think it's Manchester City, and then teams that
yeah,
you consider being below us in the Prem, bar Brighton, I think, are actually now above us. But we never really saw what he'd do in a big game, because Man City was almost too early. And I think we just needed to sort of see whether or not he'd be one of those managers that's pragmatic, or would he take the game to Liverpool? And we learned a lot. And I know I sound very negative when I'm saying things that went wrong, but there were a lot of positives to take from that game as well. And I think the fact that we were able to control the ball for the first half an hour, and the way
yeah.
we counter-pressed to win it back very high up in Liverpool's half, and the way we were able to play out of our own defence when Liverpool pressed, I thought we were exceptionally good for a small amount of
Well,
time, really, in the grand scheme of the game.
you went man for man with
Yeah, we
Liverpool.
did.
What did you think of that? I thought it
Well,
was,
I think basically with the way that Maresca's played and the footage I've seen from his time at Leicester, I kind of expected that Liverpool. I did some research onto Arne Slot and how he'd look to play out if his team were pressed, because
yeah,
I think that's something that's sort of crept into Chelsea's game in recent weeks, and especially under Maresca, is how well we've done at pressing high teams very high up the pitch. And I had a look, and it basically suggested that in previous years, when he's received that type of pressure, he would look to play over the top and isolate his
yeah,
players into attacking one-on-ones, if you like,
yeah,
all across his sort of front, which we saw. Salah would go one-on-one. We saw Jota early on, Nunez, Gakpo, all enter into sort of one-on-one territory with the defenders that Chelsea left. So I wasn't surprised. I felt like Maresca probably fancied his chances if he could find overloads by leaving the sort of 3 players defensively man for man, if you like. And then
yeah,
obviously man for man defensively kind of sets you up to set up like that throughout the pitch. And we did, didn't we? We saw very clearly Sancho was occupying the space by Trent, and Gusto was occupying
yeah,
the space by Gravenberch, and then
yeah.
Lavia was obviously pressed by the strikers, and Szoboszlai and Curtis Jones was shielding Palmer, and it kind of just set us up to play into that. So I think that game kind of didn't really take me by surprise that we set up like that, but I thought it was courageous, and I think it on another day, I think it actually probably works, and you probably get a result if we take some chances, or we're a little bit braver in terms of chance creation. I think you might actually come away with something there. So I have to commend Maresca, because in such a short amount of time, I think the players are already understanding a different and completely different change of style to what Poch was doing last season.
I agree with you, and I think also is what I kind of enjoyed seeing and learning about as well, and I kind of reflecting on the game, was how your movements in midfield with Casado, Lavia, Palmer, how you guys create space in the middle of that, and to be able to coordinate that between yourselves, especially an away ground and whatnot. I know you do it, like it's different to doing it when you're at Stamford Bridge, or maybe the team isn't as good as yours, but to be doing that away at Anfield, I thought was very, very impressive. And I can see why, because I can't remember what the stats were around Palmer and Jackson, how many goals they scored and assists they've had between themselves. And I think a lot of that is down to about how you move in the midfield. And speaking of the midfield, I'm going to leave this guy. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to speak to the gentleman, Enzo Fernandez. Because I feel like whenever people are praising Chelsea, before, if they want to take them down, and they start saying, "Oh yeah, Enzo Fernandez," they try to level things out almost. And I don't say it for that reason. I say it for this reason. Lavia seems to be doing the job that Enzo Fernandez you think would be doing? Which is, yes, we know that Lavia's press resistant, excellent on the ball, all those other things, but his quality of pass and moving the ball as quickly as he does, and at the same time being able to hand the physical side of the game, which we shouldn't be too surprised about because he's already had a solid year, especially with Southampton and everywhere else. When we're looking at Enzo Fernandez, I don't know where you stand on him or where it's at. And if this is the way Chelsea are going forward, the two pivots, at least for this year, I almost think that if Lavia stays fit and the fitter he gets, the better he gets. Does Enzo Fernandez, my question to you is, does Fernandez get back into Chelsea's squad? And if he does or doesn't, could this year be a trial period for him in terms of if he even stays at Chelsea?
Yeah, look, it's a really complicated discussion with Enzo Fernandez because obviously he was bought with a lot of hype. He was bought in such a manner that was incredibly well driven from the very top of Chelsea Football Club in terms of Egbali being on that plane out to Portugal, out to Lisbon to make that happen. They obviously viewed Enzo Fernandez as probably the star boy, the poster boy of this generation under the new Chelsea ownership. It's not quite gone as planned, I think, if that would be fair to say. And I think Chelsea fans have been left wanting every single time we've seen Enzo Fernandez play and probably just feeling that there was always a case of he could have done more. And that isn't quite what we expected off of your price tag. But look, Lavia's absolutely done himself a world of good every single time he's played. He's definitely put himself in a conversation that needs to be had, whether or not he is the centre of that Chelsea midfield going forwards. I think Enzo Fernandez, for me, under the last couple of managers since Graham Potter left, has definitely been misprofiled. I think we see the best of Enzo Fernandez when he plays for his national side, probably in a slightly deeper role, but definitely alongside other players that are capable of doing his running and probably his dirtier work, that side of the game.
Yeah.
And I just think that Enzo Fernandez under Poch and under Maresca so far, we've seen a lot of him playing very advanced and very high up the pitch. And I'm not sure that suits his game, to be honest with you. And I think what we're actually going to see probably against Panathinaikos is maybe a chance for Enzo to play in the defensive six. Now, I'm not saying that's guaranteed, but I think after not playing much at the weekend, there's a chance he plays in this game. Because I would think going forward, Maresca would probably be looking at Lavia and Caicedo to be the future of that midfield off the back of that performances. Just to throw a caveat into the mix, though, is Enzo is far more available than Lavia. And if Lavia's injury sort of issues, if they carry on, then, I mean, Lavia's definitely being hampered by them in terms of the amount of minutes he's played. I mean, we wax lyrical about how good Lavia is, but I think that might be his third game of the season.
Right. It's interesting because I've got the recent. Well, Newcastle haven't won at Stamford Bridge since Pape Cisse scored his wonder goals at Stamford Bridge as well. Wow. So I haven't brought this up to make anybody cry, but it's an interesting form of table. But since the takeover, the games between Chelsea and Newcastle have become a lot closer. Most of our wins, from all of our wins since that takeover, have been obviously at St James's Park. But we've also notched up a few good draws at Stamford Bridge as well, and had a really tight League Cup game, which I've also got another one coming up as well. My question to you is, from a rival's perspective, from the outsider looking in, how do you see kind of Newcastle's progression, and what is your kind of take on where you feel Newcastle are at this stage?
Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it? Because ultimately, I think it's difficult to say progression in terms of where you are statistically in the league right now, because it's ultimately a slight backward step. But I think as a club, we almost forget where Newcastle were just a couple of seasons ago under Mike Ashley, and it's important to put it in to perspective for me. I think you've had some difficult bouts of injury, especially last season. It was almost non-stop, wasn't it? You got some
Yeah.
very good players struggling with injuries, and I think that almost is guaranteed to hinder where you can be as a football club. And I think on your day, you're good enough to be in the top 4 race without a doubt. For me, you've got some fantastic players, but it's not without luck that will happen, because I don't
Yes.
think the squad is good as some of the better teams, but you've got some very good and very talented players that I think in the right situation and with the right circumstances can definitely achieve, I think, Champions League football season in, season out, especially with the fact that every summer you will probably recruit one player of a very good level. I think you've kind of shown, haven't you, that you've always been
Yeah.
able to bring one player in as an almost as a marquee signing, really.
Yeah.
I think probably this summer was one of the quieter windows for Newcastle, would you say?
Oh, deadly quiet. And
Yeah.
and but this is where exactly what you were saying in terms of where Newcastle, how far Newcastle were from before the takeover. It's not just, as you said, actually, it's not just statistically in terms of the table, but in every other element of the club. So if there's a good, we've got a Chelsea fan on here, people don't like. I did the show recently about our transfer business, and the reason why it's been so quiet is because obviously we were very close to breaching PSR. The big reasons why we're close to breaching PSR is because even from the beginning of the takeover, we were very, very bad sellers, to the point of where we were 24 hours away from breaching PSR and knocking on Anthony Gordon's door saying, we're going to shift you off to Liverpool so we can make it. And thankfully or unthankfully, we were able to sell players that in Minte and Elliot Anderson um, in that time, both very quality players that could have added to our squad. Now, the reason I raise that up is, and people keep on complaining about, and I'm sure you hear these arguments all the time with Chelsea about how are they able to spend billions of pounds in the next 2-3 transfer windows. And if you if you have an hour of the day and you actually go on transferwindow.com, for instance, and you look at Chelsea's business in the last 5 windows since Newcastle's takeover, you make incredible sales. But not only that, it's your strategy behind. You don't always buy players to necessarily go into your first team squad. I'm sure there's some intention for that for the player individually, but there's also to buy to sell, and that's where the state of the PSR is. And Newcastle were functioning like it was 10 years ago, where you literally buy players for your first team. It doesn't work like that anymore, and so hence why, I don't know if you know, but we've got a new director in Newcastle, Paul Mitchell, and he's got an outstanding track record of recruitment, as people will know. He brought Heung-min Son to Tottenham, as well as making Tottenham what they were at the time with Pochettino and others. And so, but also in terms of his time in RB Leipzig, where he had Nkunku, who now plays at Chelsea, and everybody else, all that's turning around. All that is in Newcastle having to be a lot more smarter in their strategies. But I think you're right in terms of how far Newcastle were and where Newcastle are trying to get to in terms of that. So you would have obviously faced tons of questions about why is Chelsea's squad so big? Were you constantly having to explain to people that not all 40 plus players were there for the first team type of thing?
Yeah, I think most Chelsea fans got that, but obviously away from that side of things, everyone was sort of predicting, like, what on earth's going to happen? How do you manage this many players? And actually from the get-go, I think it was actually put out there that there would be a separate sort of kitty in terms of funds available for players to come in who would be viewed as opportunities to probably increase finances at the club and give us a better sort of footing in terms of being able to recruit for the first team going forwards. And I think we've seen that, haven't we? We've seen the likes of I forget his name now, Angelo, who came in but didn't play for Chelsea, went on loan to Strasbourg, and is now at Al Nassr, and we made a bit of profit on
He's
him.
doing really well.
Well, he is, and I think he was a talented player, and I think there's always the potential there that if they do well, there is a pathway to the first team. However, if they don't and they go off and thrive somewhere else, they're also very happy to cash in. I mean, Lewis Hall was sort of in between the two,
Yeah,
but we obviously sold him to you for a lot of money off the back
yeah,
of only a handful of performances probably for the first team. So
yeah.
I think that's what Chelsea have been very good at. And I think the directors are fully aware that in order to have enough money to recruit for the first team, the best and biggest players, you're probably going to have to generate a huge amount of money elsewhere to be able to have that wiggle room in terms of recruiting the very best. And yet, transfer window after transfer window at the moment, we've been recruiting players for a lot of money, and some are good enough for the first team, and some are obviously of a potential business strategy, I guess.
Right, and I totally agree. And I think if people, like you said, take their time to study that a little bit, they will know where Chelsea are at. But from there, obviously, we spoke about Lewis Hall and Livramento as well. Just to say, they're doing really well. Thank you. And Lewis Hall in particular, I got to see him live in the preseason as well. Incredible. Like, I don't know if when you're playing ball sometimes where there's some people that you can see who I'm not kind of over exaggerating, but I guess the way I'm trying to say is have a relationship with the football where like they you can see they're squarely focused on the technique and what they're doing. I saw him like in between games where where the guys come out to do warm ups and stuff like that. Everything that he's doing it's all kind of focused on his technique, and I'm like, oh, this guy really is from Chelsea, isn't it? And I'm like, and he's just doing it incredibly well for us. He's statistically, especially in the last couple of games, and we're going to talk about the tactics in a moment, is he's getting about 90 to 100 touches per game. Is either, and the only other person that gets near him is Bruno Gomes. And you can just tell how important he is in terms of Lewis Hall. He's becoming for our team. And I think Bruno, from Bruno's perspective, especially, I can see there's a relationship there as well where he really trusts Lewis Hall with the ball. Before I get onto that though, and I bring the tactics board out, I'm going to first just give a couple minutes onto form. Like I mentioned earlier, both of our teams lost last week. Going into this week, but as you said, as you can see in the last 5 games for Chelsea, in particular, you've had obviously. I saw the Burrows game. I actually enjoyed that game that you guys played against Barrow. Yeah. I enjoyed that. There was some good stuff in there. It was easy, but I think that's why I enjoyed it. Brighton, obviously 4-2. I think that's Genk. Ghent. Yeah. You've got to beat them as well. No, ferocious game against Forest. Yeah, that was a ferocious game. And I think when we are talking about tactics from a Newcastle's perspective, there's a lot that Newcastle can take from Forest going into that Stamford Bridge that I think Newcastle would have to do. And obviously 2-1 at Liverpool. For you going into this game against Newcastle United, what do you think? What is the kind of what is the state of play? What is the kind of state of mind? What's the emotions for Chelsea going into this game? What is it, if anything, you're looking from Chelsea? What kind of response are you looking from Chelsea? And what are you hoping to learn from this game?
Yeah, well, I think if we'd got a result at Anfield, there would be a little bit less pressure on this game. But I think with our running that we've got over the next sort of 3 fixtures now in terms of Premier League football, there's a lot more riding on this game because I think we are now 3 points above 12th and 3 points off of 4th place Villa. So if we're to lose this game, we might find ourselves falling down the table into a sort of area that we were familiar with at this sort of stage last season, which wouldn't be fantastic. I think if we were to win, though, we're definitely in and around the places that we'd expect this Chelsea team to be at. I think how Maresca manages this off the back of 2 slightly negative results, we're obviously yet to see what happens tomorrow, but there could be a little bit of pressure creeping into Maresca if it isn't a result that goes the way Chelsea fans would hope that it would, to be honest with you. Even though it's early days, as soon as we sort of start to fall below the place that we finished last season, I think pressure will start to be applied because as a managerial appointment goes, albeit he seems to be a very confident and well-spoken manager, results talk in football, and Chelsea fans won't be happy to see us lower down the table if we aren't to win. However, I do believe there's obvious strengths in Chelsea's side that they could beat, I think, any team in the Premier League on their day if they're given the
Yeah,
chance to.
yeah, yeah. So I think, I guess the overriding focus is for Chelsea to stay in the pack in terms of looking for Champions League as well. Like that's sort of kind of thing I'm hearing for you as well. And it's important at the end of the day for Maresca to get results. He strikes me as a results type of guy. I have to say, in terms of how I don't know what your view is, but say getting rid of how certain players left, your Sterlings and others, and what I've kind of seen quotes. And I know that quotes you can get, where you can. There's a whole context behind what somebody says, but to you, is he quite a decisive manager? I mean, in terms of Sterling leaving recently today, obviously the news on Joshua Achipong.
Yeah.
Though he was a lot more positive on Joshua Achipong, to me, it seems quite clear that he would love for this guy to be able to play. I mean, for instance, in the game today would be perfect. And I'm kind of reading between the lines, but there's this contract situation. Is so far from what you've seen of Maresca, what's your kind of impression of him?
Yeah, I think he's a guy who's brutally honest. I think he is a winner. I think he's a manager that respects his players and understands what it is to be a professional footballer. But at the same time, if someone sort of stands in his way of him getting results, I don't think they'll be around long enough. I think he'll move them off very quickly, which we saw. I think he probably sounds a little bit more positive speaking about Josh now than he did in talking about players during the summer, because I actually think he's had a chance to speak with Josh and he understands the qualities that he could bring to Chelsea's team. However, in the summer, I think he probably spoke with Raheem, spoke with Ben Chilwell, Chalobah, and I think they're kind of a sort of blend between the ownership sort of suggesting that these players might need to be moved on, and also the fact that Maresca probably doesn't view them as being part of his system. So I think they're probably a good fit for each other, that they have similar ideas on how they see football. And if a player doesn't really suit the model that Chelsea have got in place right now, I think they could both probably agree that the player would need to be moved on. If you see like Pochettino, I think ultimately his ideas about football probably kind of clashed a bit with where Chelsea sporting directors want to take the team. And I think that ultimately led down to a breakdown in the relationship and a dossier being prepared that was 28 pages long for his removal from his position. So that, I just think ultimately Maresca is probably a better fit for the model than Poch ever will be. And I actually quite like and see a refreshing sort of honesty from him.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And interestingly, Joshua Achimpong, I'm not going to go for a little bit of a tangent. He is of interest to Newcastle United as well as Real Madrid, though, and others apparently as well. So we'll know who's first in the queue in that one, if that would be the case. But it kind of highlights the kind of talent that you have in your squad as well. Similarly for Newcastle, I think us going into this game for Chelsea, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of I guess I wouldn't say a lot of, when you X is just, for instance, if you look at X, is different to what you can have in real life when you're trying to get the tone of what the fan base is feeling, and it's difficult to know what the majority of Newcastle fans are feeling about this, or even for you, like if what the majority of Chelsea fans might think about a certain situation. You kind of have to get more wide perspective. For Newcastle, in terms of our form, again, mixed, obviously, but ironically, we started the first 5 games apart from the Wolves game, where our performances haven't been the greatest, but we've been people getting away with results. I say when you have expended a lot of money on quality, you tend to get the results that you don't always deserve sometimes. So whereas now in the last 3-4 games, the performances have been better. Our intensity is returning in terms of our ground duels, our aerial duels, our tackles, everything else, us pressing up the field a lot more and what we're doing. But the results haven't always been reflective of that. So that kind of tough against Man City. Obviously, Man City's Man City, but our performance, that was a really, really good performance, we can say. And then obviously going forward into the Everton game, again, a good performance in that. We had a penalty. We should have scored it. That should have, that didn't happen. And the Brighton game, and you guys faced Brighton. My annoyance with Brighton is I think they learned from the Chelsea game. And they learned a lot from the Chelsea game. They stopped doing the high pressing in the Chelsea game. And they said, oh, no, you know what? They've got Isak and Gordon. We're going to stop doing this high pressing to the level that we did. And they were a lot more disciplined to the point where they were doing low blocks. They were still Brighton in aspects, but they were a lot more mixed up about it in terms of mixing up the game. And obviously, I researched the Chelsea game or everything that they did wrong in that game and how they pressed up. You'd have Jackson dropping off, connecting with Enzo Fernandez, doing those passes. Madueke on the wings, Cole Palmer then setting off against. So you'd almost have a 4v4 situations, and you guys could totally destroy them. I wish we played Brighton at that stage because I feel like we would have probably had that game. But they said, no, we're not going to do that against Newcastle. We're going to learn a little bit there. But we ended up having the majority of the possession in that game, the majority of shots, chances created, big chances missed and stuff like that. So that was the annoyance in terms of just the finishing part of the game for that. So Newcastle are at a stage where going into this Chelsea game, we need to marry our performance with our results. And so for me, what I'm looking for from this Chelsea game is that. And I don't say I'm not saying it in a way where what's the word I'm trying to think of? I understand how difficult the challenge is. It's Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. I'm just speaking where I think what I'm hoping to see from Newcastle. I want an improvement on our performances, and I'm hoping that we can also see our front line in particular, in Gordon and Isak, who have not been as fine as much. Isak is obviously coming back from an injury as much as we want. So we want to see them back essentially. So I want to be able to see that, and I'm hoping to see performance married with our results. So speaking of tactics, of the time we've got left, I want to be able to. Let me see. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Now, I took the Chelsea squad from the Liverpool game. Is there anything here that you would change in terms of Chelsea's starting lineup?
So I would potentially expect to see Cucurella return and Fofana instead of Tosin and Gusto. I think that will probably happen. I also wonder whether
you wouldn't happen to know Cucurella's number. If you don't, it doesn't make you less of a Chelsea fan. But if you did know no worries.
He is number. I'm gonna get it up. I want to say like 3. Yeah.
All right. Great. And the other one was Tosin for Fofana.
Yeah, who I believe is 29.
All right.
I hope I'm right on that. I'll just double check. Yeah,
that's
29.
Right.
And I also wonder whether Pedro Neto may in fact start over
Sancho
after being dragged the other day. Pedro Neto is number 7. I just wonder, and obviously we don't know what injuries can occur during the week, and obviously
that's true. That is
tomorrow.
True.
So
yeah,
this could be subject to change, but for me, that is probably the team I think most Chelsea fans would be wanting to see going into this game. If it's probably our strongest 11, if I'm being completely honest with you.
Yeah, I think I agree. And well, it's not my team, but I think I agree in terms of what I know of Chelsea as well. I've always said I feel like Cucurella is one of the key cogs in Chelsea's machine, the connect. I know that Gusto was doing that job against Liverpool, but especially when I actually watched the Brighton game, and I noticed that the only way I can describe it is when Enzo Fernandez obviously started that game, and I looked at Cucurella as the man that covers the many sins of Enzo Fernandez in terms of tracking back. But what it allowed allowed Enzo Fernandez to show his strengths, his passing ability, long, short, long and short. I think it was one of the better games for Enzo Fernandez because of Correa, in my opinion. So this is your starting lineup. For Newcastle, I think this is probably our likely lineup. My one teething issue is probably Murphy. And it's only because, and when I go into the tactics, why I think a lot of people, you wouldn't know, want Harvey Barnes. They want a whole load in terms of Isak, Barnes, and Gordon up front. And people might wonder, why would you put Murphy on the right side instead of either, Gordon or Barnes? But, both Gordon and Barnes have very much stated they want to play left wing forward. And but they're versatile wingers, they'll say, you have to, there's a defensive quality that I think Murphy's going to show in this game. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of Chelsea going forward, and I kind of took this off. I want to start off with. I'm going to just talk about Chelsea or Chelsea with the ball, then Newcastle with the ball, and kind of analyze key strengths there. Yeah. And see if you agree. And we just had the kind of what you guys did against Liverpool, and obviously I know that Liverpool was obviously different to Newcastle. But I'm going to use it as a springboard to kind of open up discussions on it and kind of get your take on it, and kind of see where you might see kind of adaptations to what Chelsea might do. You've got a double pivot in terms of, so say with Chelsea with the ball, in this case it'd be Cucurella. Yeah. Chelsea with the ball, this is how you kind of overload the midfield. My understanding, and in this case, it'll be Fofana, James, and obviously it will change in terms of which side of the pitch you want to kind of go on. But for sake of argument, I'm going to go on the left side of the pitch. Neto obviously pushing up there. This is where you kind of create your overloads, especially in the centre midfield. Obviously, Madueke pushing up against Lewis Hall, which again 1v1s. You look at maybe quite shaky, especially because I really rate Madueke. I don't know what your thoughts on him are.
But, a very talented player, especially in the one-on-one. I think he's up there in terms of players in the league for take-ons now. After that game against Robertson, he definitely had him beat a number of times. I don't actually think we utilised his threat enough, and this season he started to add goals to his game as well. He's a player that is very, very focused on his development and is always trying to improve. I mean, all summer you see him working and on the training pitch in warmer countries, and he really is trying to take himself and his game to the next level. So yeah, I was slightly frightened with the linking him to you guys in the summer, to be honest with you.
Well, I've been trying to. You'll be surprised. There were some people saying, "Nah." Some people compared him to Almiron. And I said, "Listen, like there's nowhere near Almiron. Like honestly, in terms of and I'm going to be doing a show later this week actually for Newcastle, looking for a right winger, and why Madueke, for instance, who has I'm not saying the same player, but a similar profile to your Kulusevskis and to your Cole Palmers in terms of tall, athletic, great dribblers. Great at carrying the ball, passing, everything else, and really good at ball retention as well. Good in the possession-based team. And I think he's absolutely excellent. And I felt that, and I know what you thought, but when you look at the stats of last season, he only had 23 games where he started, and in those games he was subbed most of those games as well. So his goal efficiency, if you look at his goal efficiency metrics, are really high. But for instance, his goal threat, so him being in the position where he's dangerous to the opposition, is quite low. And I think why the reason of that is that whilst he was on the pitch, he was very effective in front of goal. But because he was taken off early, he didn't have an opportunity to build on his ability to be also dangerous throughout the game as well and threatening. And if you look at his metrics now, all of that has now evened out. He's become the player that I think he is. Ball carrying, again, 80, 90 metrics. A goal efficiency, 80, 90 metrics. Ball retention, again, really, really high. Goal threat, all those metrics are really, really high. Not only that, but he's also very, very good off the ball. So I think he's got so much going for him, in my opinion. So this is the conundrum that Chelsea provide, in my opinion. I know what you would add to this is when you put Cucurella there, kind of adding to almost like a 3-man midfield. Would this be the right way? Where a 3-man midfield, what it means is that because you've got Palmer pushing up with Jackson, you don't want Palmer alone with Burn, and you don't want Jackson alone with Shaw. Someone like Joe Linton, for instance, and Tonali are in a situation of, well, who do you mark then? And you could then be leaving gaps. And one thing I've noticed, and you let me know, what Chelsea are good is that they're not static like this. You will have a Casado moving to the side like this, who's then available from a pass, either from Fofana or others, to then kind of fill in, who creates that space. And then Joe Linton has to go out. And you leave those spaces for Palmer and others. Or you'll have Lavia. You'll have Lavia going out here, creating that space in the middle, and then Jackson coming to fill in. Can you guys see the ball moving around? So
yeah.
And then you'll have Colwell then having this. And this is the situation no team wants to. And I think this is similar to the goal that you guys scored against Liverpool, but it was Casado obviously that filled in that gap at the time, and then did that through ball to Jackson. In this case, obviously Jackson coming in, and then you'll have maybe Palmer doing the run through the middle. I don't know if there's anything to add to that, but is that kind of, so these are the kind of the key areas for me in terms of me being an opposition side, where I'm most worried about Chelsea with the ball, is these little gaps here because of your overload that you create. I don't know what you think about that or what you'll add to that.
Yeah, so I think those areas of the pitch are definitely where Chelsea possess some threat. In recent weeks, I think we've been slightly limited. I think what you'll see is Newcastle may decide to drop a little bit deeper on recent evidence of how teams have had success against Chelsea. So I wonder whether Chelsea will be allowed the ball in that area or not, or they might set up a very similar screen to sort of what Liverpool did, where they made it sort of difficult, easy enough for us to play through to the likes of Casado in that sort of area of the pitch, but not so easy to make it through to the next line, to Jackson, to Palmer, to Neto, if they sort of drifted in between the defensive midfield and the centre-backs. I think maybe they look to do a similar thing. I'm slightly intrigued to see how this works with Cucurella returning, because if he does in fact start at the weekend, I wonder whether he'll pick up a slightly deeper role and Casado may be given license to go on into that sort of advanced 8-10 role that we've seen Enzo Fernandez in, and then Cucurella may end up in a double pivot alongside Lavia at times, or where he is on the pitch there is probably okay. I just kind of wonder how that's going to work, to be honest with you, with this, because we've been used to seeing Cucurella come into the midfield from that left-back position because Casado has been his partner and Enzo Fernandez hasn't been deployed in the defensive position. But now Casado and Lavia are there. I'm just intrigued to see how that works. And I don't think we'll know until we see the game plan actually unveiling in front of our eyes. But yeah, I expect Chelsea to obviously be looking to focus on Madueke and Neto and getting the ball to them in isolation. So they'll overload one side of the pitch and look to move the ball round swiftly out towards Neto or Madueke in the hopes that they can beat their man one-on-one, I think, against Newcastle.
I totally agree. I think what Newcastle might do, and maybe you can give me a counter to this, is, and it's similar to what Liverpool did with Szoboszlai, where I think Murphy drops back. So Murphy is the one who covers the extra man, whether it's Cucurella, whoever it is. I think it'll be Murphy who drops back. And so what that leaves for Newcastle to do, I've got to get myself better with these crayons. So what that leaves for Newcastle to do is say Cole has the ball. Obviously, who's the main kind of distributor? Is it really either any of those three?
I would say actually against Liverpool, it was Reece James. I felt like Reece James was finding himself on the ball, looking to play that pass into Casado a few times. I think Lavia as well is absolutely instrumental. If any press is put onto him, he looks incredibly press resistant. So and then to throw into the mix, I mean, it's not like Fofana and Levi Colwell are unable to play out from the back, as well as Caicedo could drop deeper into that if he needs to. And obviously, there is a little bit of fluidity. What I find with Chelsea is that they always try to occupy a similar shape, but they don't mind if players are picking up different areas, if you like. So Maresca doesn't really mind if it was Cole Palmer obviously occupying where Caicedo is and Caicedo made that run, or if Gusto, who we saw against Liverpool, would appear in that sort of 10 position.
So rotation, yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't mind it. I think as long as he keeps a similar shape, he doesn't seem to mind if it's a different player or different name, as long as the other position is covered. So as long as he sort of keeps kind of a 3-2-5 sort of shape, I think he's okay with however that looks in terms of what player is where, I think. However, I would say Madueke is told to stay out to the right, and Pedro Neto will probably be told to stay out on the left, and the defence will be pretty rigid. But there'll be a little bit of fluidity in there in terms of the midfield positions, as long as they're all occupying the right spaces.
And that's the key for Chelsea's kind of fluid rotation. I think for Newcastle, I think to counter that, like I said, Murphy would have to follow Cucurella to ensure that there isn't an overload in terms of players. And so we do sacrifice possession, but we sacrifice possession in your third of the pitch. And that, like, I agree with you. I think Newcastle, the wire situation would be for Newcastle to sit back a little bit deeper, not totally deeper, where you're just having to play in your own half. I don't think they'll do that. I think so. For instance, what I think will happen is, say for instance, Reece James has the ball. You'll still see Isak or Gordon closing down. In this case, it'd be Gordon. Isak trying to block off the channels to Fofana. And obviously here, Gordon is closing down really, really good. But in terms of your pivots, typically your pivots being your Caicedos and Lavias, you will probably see, so Murphy, see Cucurella, you see Bruno with Lavia, and you'll see Joe Linton here with a Caicedo or a Palmer. In either case, whoever is in that spot, to ensure there isn't that kind of numerical advantage. Or if obviously Cucurella really, really drops deep, you would have Tonali picking him up, and you'd have Murphy going up. Though I think they prefer Tonali to be up in advanced position compared to Murphy. But Murphy will be in charge of these kind of areas in terms of making sure we're not overloaded. And I wonder if the only concern I have for Newcastle in these type of situations is that we don't drop back too deep. And one of the things that Liverpool did against Chelsea, and I don't know if you'll agree with this, but because you guys go man for man and you do it really, really, really well, it forced Liverpool to go long. But when you've got Salah and Gakpo, and obviously our players aren't too bad either up front, they became a lot more effective in that. So that's what kind of hurt Chelsea a little bit. And I think Newcastle will be forced to go long as well. So you'd have to have Gordon and Isak making sure that if the ball does fall to our favour, if we do manage to catch, because there is, you kind of spoke about it nearly in the beginning of the show, where you said you were getting caught a little bit in transition down those channels, partly because of, and maybe I'm paraphrasing here, it's because you do have that overload. So the overload is good when it works. Like you take control of, and you take control of those of the midfield areas really, really well. However, if the personal duels are won, so for instance, I take the Nottingham Forest game, for example, I read up on the personal duels between both teams were almost dead even. And so if Newcastle are to get to make this work, it doesn't matter how good the shape is or how well Murphy tracks Cucurella. We have to win our personal battles in those areas, because if Newcastle, if for instance Joe Linton is too slow to close down a Caicedo, and you got Palmer off, you got Jackson off here, this is where the big problems happen for Newcastle. So all of this got to be right. on the other side of that, the flip coin of that is if Newcastle do win their personal battles, so Joe Linton covers is able to get the ball off Caicedo, well then you've got Bruno off here and Lavia falling, and I do fancy Bruno against Lavia in a physical battle. It's not to say that Lavia is no shrinking violet or anything like that, but in this case where I think where you do get caught in a transition, if Caicedo I prefer Bruno against. Let me put it this way: I prefer Bruno against Lavia than I would against Bruno against Caicedo in this type of situation. So, and that's where we can kind of hopefully catch you in the transition in that way. Or if we do end up in these type of situations where we kind of have to bypass the midfield because you do go man for man, and we go directly to Isak. And we'll go directly to Gordon. And this is where it kind of leads me to my question to you. And maybe you can also kind of comment on stuff that I've said already is, if Newcastle do go long, I don't know if you think it's true, but someone mentioned that, I know that Reece James is obviously coming back from a long-term injury. Is he as quick as he used to be? Or is...
It's difficult to say, isn't it? I think he definitely still looks like he's dynamic enough to cover any sort of runs in behind, and he dealt with a Cody Gakpo. I think Gordon is probably a little bit quicker than that, so maybe that'll be an issue for Reece, and I'm sure he'll be giving his hamstrings a good test, whoever sort of is running him, because Isak is a quick guy. Obviously, bombing on Lewis Hall isn't slow. I think there's a couple of issues there, and I think those... There's definitely potential for Newcastle to set up in a very similar way to what Liverpool ended up being forced into as well. But it was almost, I'm not sure whether or not Liverpool intended to play like that from the get-go. I think they're almost forced into it. And then it was actually almost a blessing in disguise for them, because then they were able to look for the long ball against an isolated Chelsea defender in a one-on-one, and actually then allow their sort of third man runs to come from deeper in their midfield.
You made up their minds for them almost by going
exactly man. Right. We almost got unlucky in the fact that we played into their hands without realizing that it would happen, because we were able to press so high. But it also shows the tactical adaptability of Arne Slot and where he's at as a manager. And I think he's looking like he's going to be a fantastic one. But yeah, I think there's similarities in how Newcastle might set up, because I think they've now probably seen Forest and Liverpool do similar in terms of looking to isolate those one-on-one positions against that rest defense of Chelsea. I just wonder whether or not Maresca will tweak anything. And I look at where Cucurella is potentially, if you think about the Liverpool game and where Gusto was on a graphic you showed a little bit earlier on, Gusto was probably a lot more advanced. What I wonder is, if I said it a minute ago, is if Caicedo is allowed to be more advanced, it means Cucurella will probably be in a slightly more defensive position, so that he's closer in terms of recovering position on the transition, if that makes sense.
Right. Rest defense.
I think, if you see where Lavia and if you swap them around, Lavia and Cucurella, I think what you might see is say something along that, they might be something along that, right? If we say that in transition, Cucurella gets the ball there, say we give the ball away, Cucurella is far closer to returning to left back than if he was in that left-sided 8-10 position, similar to where Tonali's occupying right now, where Gusto was picking up the space against Liverpool. It's a much shorter recovery journey than it is from being further up the pitch. And I just wonder whether or not that might be something that creeps in if you do look to break and play us on the counter-attack. But I believe Newcastle might cause Chelsea some issues with set pieces as well. I just think you've got some very physical players. And I have to say, in more recent fixtures, this has been a very physical game. It's got a little bit dirty at times. The dark arts are something this young, inexperienced Chelsea team are struggling to get to grips with at the moment. And I just wonder whether or not, I mean, Dan Burn, the last couple of times he's been to Stamford Bridge, has definitely riled some feathers. I wonder whether they're the sort of players that actually, as much as we don't really focus on them in a tactical setup, that actually corners, set pieces, it could be a real sort of way and a chance for Newcastle to get themselves into this game. Because I feel like for you guys at the moment, in the last few games I've watched, actually scoring goals has been a bit of an issue for you, hasn't it?
Yeah, 100%. You speak about set pieces. They should be our main thing. And I really hope in this game we improve it. But Dan, our set pieces have been not good, and I'm being very,
Right.
very nice at the moment. Literally not going past the first man, and it doesn't matter
Yeah,
who's.
we're in a similar boat.
Oh, are you okay?
Yeah, yeah. Chelsea have been pretty. I don't feel confident with how Chelsea have been with set pieces this season. The majority of our goals have actually come from individual mistakes and failing to get to the second ball on set pieces, I would say.
Yeah,
And if you look at the
yeah,
Nottingham
yeah, yeah.
Forest game, their goal came from a set piece. If obviously Liverpool not so much, but I look at Genk and I look at a couple of other games in weeks gone by, we've been a little bit lackadaisical, I'd say, from reacting to second balls at set pieces and actually winning the physical battle. So I sort of wonder how that will turn out, because I see Newcastle as a side that can kind of switch it up and go either way, to be honest with you. They could look to play the long ball and sort of back their runners in behind, or they could look to play a physical game that wastes a lot of time and sort of frustrates this young Chelsea side and doesn't allow them to play through. I expect you to be very narrow and very compact, actually. And like
Yes,
you said, Murphy is obviously going to be drifting in from that right-hand side. I think you will be looking to get Isak, Gordon, your Brunos and Joel Linton, Tonali, those sort of players, Murphy included, to break on the counter-attack and take their moments, to be honest with you. And I feel like Chelsea have struggled with that. We've definitely conceded and been rash in moments. We saw it against Liverpool that Maresca must trust these guys to play and set up in the way that he does. But we also saw that when Levi Colwill was isolated against Salah, he was a little bit rash. There was a penalty shout before he eventually committed one against Curtis Jones. Tosin, we saw get into that sort of fuffle with Jota and bring him down. So these are guys that, off the back of that Liverpool game, I think Eddie Howe might look at and think, can we get to them? Can we test them? Can we make them panic with some strong runners?
so if Newcastle were to go long, what would be your greater concern? Isak against Colwell, for instance, or Gordon against Reece James?
I think they both come with concerns. My heart tells me that Reece James will be absolutely fine
We'll
and
be fine.
he'll be okay, right, with Gordon, because I believe he's that good. But also, we actually don't know what Reece James we've currently got on our hands. He's played 50 minutes. We don't know where his hamstring's at. We're not sure. Levi Colwill, obviously, against Liverpool was a little bit rash, and I don't know if the occasion got to him. And there was a couple of mistakes on the ball and off the ball. And Isak is a smart guy, and I'm sure will cause some issues. And Anthony Gordon, no matter where he is on that pitch, will be absolutely relentless.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
And
yeah.
I
He's not
also
going to stop running.
believe that Joelinton is in a slightly similar mold to what Curtis Jones did, I think. And
Yes.
I
Yeah.
feel like Joelinton from deep could be a bit of an issue. I mean, he's a fantastic player that brings so much. He's very unique, I think, Joelinton. I mean, he's similar in terms of how I think he'll set up to Curtis Jones in this game, but at the same time, he's so physically strong. He's very dynamic. He's a great asset to have in your team. I think he from deep would be someone I'd keep my eye on. Obviously, Tonali, I've not seen too much of this season. But yeah, it's difficult for me to say, but Anthony Gordon is so relentless and a player that is probably on a bit of a high after signing that new deal. I wonder whether or not Reece James will be able to cope with him. And then obviously, if Reece James is limited to minutes, by the way, Anthony Gordon may in fact end up facing someone else if he's on the pitch for the full 90, or indeed if Harvey Barnes or someone else like that enters the pitch. It's not like you don't have a lack of depth. You've got good players to bring on and constantly persist with looking to play into that space in behind and isolate your runners in one-on-ones.
Yeah, I mean, and apologies, I didn't bring up Chelsea subs, and you probably got tons there. But you're right in terms of the longer the game goes on. For instance, if we've still got the likes of Willock who can stretch the play to come on, and Harvey Barnes, like you said, he mentioned those guys can come on and continue kind of that stretch of play, because regardless of how deep Chelsea's squad are, you can only put on 11 players like we can, and you can only put on 5 subs like we can. You've got the variety, obviously, to change obviously, but I'm thankful that you can only, we can only put as many subs as we can to kind of rotate the game. And I think I totally agree with you. I think if what Joe Linton does for us and what he did against Man City, because I think while you're talking, I think Maresca may depend a little bit more deeply on his wingers. I think he'll fancy Madueke against Lewis Hall and possibly see what Neto can do against Livramento, because Livramento does a lot of things right, and I love what he does. Sometimes he's very good at in terms of back to goal, and he's really good at what happens is he'll pick up the ball relatively centrally, and he's able to carry the ball really, really well. So he can be very press resistant, can carry the ball really well. And what that happens is everything opens up then for Newcastle, because obviously then Bruno can advance a little bit more. If Joe Linton's in that position, you get this type of situations when that happens. That's an ideal situation. However, defensively, he needs work, and that's why sometimes, unless if Kieran Trippier wasn't injured at this stage, he'll be playing. But in terms of Joe Linton, he's been very unique for us, where he literally is very box to box. And so he is sometimes using this kind of way to support Lewis Hall. And obviously that's where Chelsea get a chance to then do overloads. Because if Joe Linton drops in like that to support Lewis Hall, you'll either see Casado, I imagine, or Levi Colwell, maybe, trying to get into the back as well. Here as well, if Madueke picks up the ball. Those type of situations that can occur. So it'll be really, these type of battles would be really, really interesting to me, kind of to see how they go. So, yeah, I think the other thing, and maybe hopefully Enzo Maresca isn't watching this, but Brighton, what they've learned is they targeted Shaw. And they targeted Shaw in terms of 1v1 situations. For pace, for strength, Jackson's got it on Shaw. And that's going to be in a lot of our games. Shaw's 33, 34 now. On the ball, fantastic. So you'll see a lot of good if you're worried about long balls and diagonals, Shaw and Lewis Hall are the ones who are exceptional at that. But if there's one situation I'm worried about is if Tonali, for instance, in this case, or if it's Murphy, don't close down Cucurella or whoever, and Jackson's on his bike, especially centrally here, and I don't fancy Shaw being able to catch him.
Yeah, because even Danny Welbs he scored ultimately through a 1-2 around Shaw, didn't he?
Exactly. And that's the kind of situations I'm worried about. And this is where Tonali has been playing in a very advanced role for us. He's kind of over here, and that's why partly our supply line to our attackers has been quite good. I know we haven't been scoring, but we've been good. So we've always been able to. We had like 20 plus shots goals against Brighton and stuff like that. It's because of having Tonali and others advanced. But I feel like for Chelsea, there's got to be a bit of a more discipline for Tonali in this area, especially if there's going to be overloads from Cucurella. But also if you choose to go long or directly to Jackson, where if Shaw is struggling and there's a second ball that ends up coming from this challenge, Tonali's got to be there to support Shaw. What that might mean is that we drop a bit deeper, but I think it has to be done. And we've got to figure out a way then, if we do collect that second ball, to be able to come out of it. Because I can imagine you guys squeezing us even more then and really trying to kind of keep us hemmed in, if that makes sense. So, but I think Tonali's got to protect Shaw in that kind of instance. So, yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I think if my kind of key takeaway in terms of what I see the threats from Chelsea are in these kind of highlighted areas, your overloads, and making sure that from a Newcastle perspective, we're absolutely on top of our game in terms of our 1v1 duels, especially what we did against Man City. We followed that on, obviously, against Everton and Brighton and others. We got to be on our 1v1 duels And if we're able to, because I think one mistake and the moment we didn't even get to speak about Cole Palmer. Goodness
Yeah.
gracious. You know, but I don't know what you thought about Cole Palmer in the game. Curtis Jones did a superb job. And I
He did
think Joe,
indeed.
yeah.
Oh, go on. Yeah, I was just going to say he did indeed, and I actually wonder whether Eddie Howe will be. I did mention it.
Yeah.
Will be looking similarly at Joelinton to do quite a similar job, because obviously Cole Palmer struggled with that. I think it's honestly we know the ability that Cole Palmer's got.
Yes.
Maresca knows the talent that's there, that it can win him games. I think Maresca is probably going to be focused on, actually most teams 90% of the time are now going to sort of try and have a similar sort of tactic around isolating that sort of man to cover Cole Palmer, basically, and select a man marker for the game. I think we have a sort of decision now where we have to sort of focus on a route to goal and a way to score away from that being Cole Palmer. And I think that's what Maresca's focus will be on, is creating from other areas. But he also has to be looking at it thinking, Cole Palmer's my best player. I can't afford for him to be as out of the game as he was against Liverpool. They're probably working on something right now in a way to get Cole Palmer on the ball. I actually felt like, because of the positional restrictions applied to a couple of players in the team, Cole Palmer actually didn't quite have the fluidity required to break away from Curtis Jones, if
So
that makes sense.
Reece James couldn't advance as much as he could.
Yeah, potentially so. Although Reece is definitely being limited in terms of how much he
Yeah.
can get forward. So
Yeah.
I wonder whether we may see sort of Cole Palmer being allowed to drop a little bit further deep, or in fact maybe trying to drag Joelinton to the other side of the pitch to leave
Yeah.
Madueke in a 1v1 with Lewis Hall, something
Yeah.
like that, because I think that's probably where we're looking at. Cole Palmer will always now bring a man with him, if not two, and I wonder whether that will allow us to create overloads in other areas. So I'm absolutely sure Maresca will be working on that. I think it's going to be a chess match, and I think a lot of games for Chelsea this season, especially in an isolated period of this month, are going to be chess matches, because I think a lot of managers are still trying to figure out the best way to beat Chelsea, and at the same time they're so wary of the threat Chelsea possess, and defensively there are potential weaknesses because we've seen Chelsea concede quite a few goals. So look, it's an interesting one, and I'm sure it will be, and I'm sure as the game goes on, some of the things we've said will come to fruition, and sometimes the managers will be absolutely ahead of us and a step ahead, and they will throw things into the mix that we didn't quite see coming. But yeah, on the basis of what I've seen Chelsea doing in the last couple of games, where ultimately Chelsea's results haven't been good enough, I wonder whether there'll be a slight roll of the dice from Maresca to try something a little bit different in order to potentially find a way to start winning games again, because Chelsea at Stamford Bridge are definitely not as good as they once were as well.
Man, I'm revved up. I'm ready.
It'll be a
So
good one, I can tell you that much. It'll be feisty. I'm absolutely sure of it.
Well, you got the South American flavor between what's his name, Casado, Joe Linton, and others. I remember when Casado was at Brighton,
Yeah.
for instance, him and Bruno and Joe Linton had their thing. It was insane. That's going to be interesting. So we'll go into predictions, but just before that, I've got a couple of comments I want to read. Sorry, I hope I haven't taken you over time,
No,
Dan.
you're good. You're good. You're good.
Brilliant. I'll just read a couple of comments and we'll go into predictions. Jonathan Shaw, always good to see you, sir. Really consistent as always. I've got a strange feeling, excuse me, I've got a strange feeling we're going to turn up this game. It just seems that the negativity from voices outside hasn't affected, the squad's togetherness, and I think will come good. Interesting. And just one more again from Shaw. Although that might be blind loyalty, but I haven't given up on our squad, and we are full of talent. We just need that spark. And that kind of sums up where I think I'm hoping to see Newcastle at in terms of going up into this game myself. And it is that we want to see that spark. And it's not undermining at all. The fact, if anything, is emphasizing the challenge that we would have playing against a team like Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. And I didn't even get the chance to show how many metrics actually Chelsea are doing really good at in terms of shots on goal, goals scored, territorial kind of dominion, actually, centrally and advanced in terms of most of their games. That a lot of the metrics for Chelsea are really, really high. Ground duels, all the shot conversion. You're actually overperforming that at the moment as well. So the challenge is there for Newcastle as well. And if there's ever a sparks don't happen against relegation teams. Sparks happen when you're playing these type of games where the odds are against you. So that's what I'm hoping to see from Newcastle. In terms of predictions, going into this game, I'm going to be confident, and I'm going to say that our forwards will try to right the wrongs of Brighton in terms of their finishing. I think we can do something in this game. I'm going to go for a 1-1 at Stamford Bridge.
Okay, I'm going to go with a 2-1. I think Chelsea are in a position where they have to win, and Newcastle are the sort of team that are going to be in a similar sort of position come the end of the season. I ultimately know that it will be a lot tougher than what I think some people think it will be based on Newcastle's form.
Yeah.
People have to remember that these are the sort of games where, like you said, a spark may throw the game a light, and Newcastle are very good when it comes to that sort of thing. And they're a difficult side to play against, which I think is, if a side is difficult to play against, this Chelsea team can find it frustrating. And if the game sort of turns a little bit like the Forest game did, if you think about it, all of a sudden then I think that's where it becomes a little bit more difficult for Chelsea. But my hope is it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then I think we might nick it.
Well, there you have
down well on a Newcastle.
Well, there you have it, folks. We've had our we've given our predictions. We've talked about Chelsea's, Newcastle's kind of situations off the pitch, where our players are, where our club is at, kind of some of the changes going on, as well as what this kind of game means to both teams going into this particular game. We went through the tactical breakdown of it, what the key strengths and weaknesses of both teams are, but also on the pitch, where the tactical battles are going to be, where the kind of key duels are going to be as well, and what's important for both teams and what are the likely kind of tactics from that. And we've given you our predictions as well. So with all of that said, I want to say a big, big, big thank you to you, Dan, for coming on the show. Like I said, I'm really, really glad that I was able to get you on and have this kind of. I knew this would be like this in depth, especially kind of tactically and talking about the team as well. So I'm really, really appreciative for that. Do let folks know where they can find you as well.
Yeah, a pleasure coming on to, and I really enjoyed it. It's great to actually be able to sit and talk tactics and get into it, because it's not actually something I get to do too often on YouTube, and I could sit here and do it for hours, but the evening's getting away from us. Yeah, no, honestly, a real pleasure, and I think it will be really intriguing to see if anything we said actually comes to fruition, because that's always the funny thing with tactics. Yeah, I'm live and on TikTok and YouTube on BDB Dan, if you want to come and check it out. I speak about football, not just Chelsea, all the time. If Chelsea gets a bit boring or whatever, there's definitely other content there. But look, appreciate coming on. Make sure everyone in the chat and viewing it afterwards to drop a like and subscribe as well, because I've really enjoyed doing this, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, sir. And to all the folks that have watched, the comments that have come in, really appreciate you guys. Make sure you have a really good evening. And as always, guys, take care of each other and God bless.